another episode of Us Anxious Folk. My name is Lauren, and in today's episode, we are going to be talking about a requested topic which I love the idea of because I think this is something that happens to a lot of us. The request was talking about apathy with recovery. I guess kind of losing motivation to do exposures, losing motivation to kind of push yourself to get back out there. This is definitely something that has happened to me in the past, and I think, like I said, happens to a lot of us because the thing is, exposure is hard. Doing exposure therapy is challenging. Working through your fears is challenging. And I know I have sometimes felt like, kind of like it's unfair, like you sort of go through your life dealing with agoraphobia, dealing with panic and anxiety, and you kind of have those thoughts of like, or I've had those thoughts of like, why do I have to work so hard to just have a normal life? Like, why do I have to do so much work? Why do I have to work through my fears every day? Why do I have to go through panic and anxiety just getting in the car, going to the shops in order to work my way towards feeling normal? Because it's exhausting. It's exhausting to have to do that all the time, and the expectations of others upon you when you're doing that, the kind of journey you have to go on internally but also externally and within the relationships that you have, like, it's all a lot, and you can kind of get to a point where that becomes overwhelming and you don't want to continue it anymore. But also, if you've gotten to a place where like you're kind of able to function to a degree, so, maybe you've been able to go back to work, or you're sort of like, you have like a comfort zone that allows you to live sort of normally, like you can go to work and you can get the groceries and you can do all of those kind of things. But when it comes to, say, like going on a holiday with your family, or longer drives, or like going out for coffee with friends at a restaurant that's like not in your safe zone, like those kind of things that are going to come up in life, when those come up, it's like you say no because you're like, I can function, but I can't do those things. On the one hand, that can be a really uncomfortable place to be. But on the other hand, it can be a comfortable place to be because it's like you're doing enough to get by, enough to sort of live your life where people don't expect too much of you because you're doing things, but you're not having to put yourself through the pain and the fear and the challenge of exposing yourself to your anxiety and your fears every day, and doing things that really make you squirm, like getting on a plane, or going on those longer drives and all those kind of things. And so you can become comfortable in that space. And I guess that's why it's called a comfort zone, because, it feels familiar. It feels like what you can handle, what you're used to, and you don't have to ask too much of yourself. And I really have a lot of compassion for people who have spent a long time housebound, or have spent a long time dealing with panic and anxiety, and then they've sort of gotten their way to a semi-functional place. And they're in that comfort zone because I think there is such a weight of expectation from others. And so you've already worked really hard to get yourself to that space. And so like pushing further feels unmanageable. And so I have compassion for people in that space, because I was in that space too for a long time. And it felt like I had done all I could to get by, and I just couldn't do any more for a little while. And look, I think it's perfectly acceptable to rest. I think it's fine to have periods of rest. I think we are cyclical beings, and like anxiety itself comes in waves. And I think our sort of recovery journey maybe, but I guess just our journey in general with anxiety should also have, ebbs and flows to it. And sometimes we're going to want to push ourselves, and sometimes we're not, and that's all right. But if we're talking strictly about that space of apathy, that kind of like just meh, like, I'm not happy where I am, but I also just like don't have any desire to push myself. If we're talking about that, then I think that's a different thing to resting. And I think that really what that comes down to is there is this huge desire to actually want to change our circumstances. There's this huge urge and drive to want to go out of our comfort zone, but there's a layer of fear around that. And then there's a layer of anxiety around that, and there's a layer of panic around that, and it's like this fucking onion that we don't want to cut into because we know that there's going to be so much involved. And so we kind of keep it closed, we keep it over there, and we sort of add the label of apathy to it. And that's a way of keeping ourselves safe. That's a way of keeping ourselves it's kind of a way of, I guess, excusing the fact that we aren't going after what we want. It sort of comes under the umbrella of procrastination to a degree. And I don't think that's a conscious thing. I don't think we're necessarily conscious that we're doing that. So please don't think I'm pointing the finger and calling anyone lazy or anything like that. I don't think it's that. I think it's this really unconscious desire to keep ourselves safe. And so anything that we know is going to be laced with challenge and fear and uncertainty and all the feelings that we've worked so hard at, getting ourselves through. If there's something that's going to stir all that up, our brains are like, let's just not touch that. Let's put it over there on a shelf. Let's get it down at a later date. And for now, we'll just exist. Because I think that's really what it is a lot of the time. We're just kind of existing. We're not really living the way we want to be living. And like I said, it can be comfortable. It can be comfortable enough, but I think that's only because we're not looking at how uncomfortable we really are. I think if you're really honest with yourself and took some time to dive into what it is you want, what are the things you want to do with your life, and you really spent like a month journaling about that and getting clear on that, I think you would realize that there's actually a lot of pain there. There's a lot of discomfort, but it feels like it's like it kind of has that like illusory layer of comfort on it. Again, as like a survival mechanism, a way of keeping ourselves safe. I watched this really interesting Instagram video. I'll try and find it and link it. I just came across it when you're like flicking through your, reels or whatever. It was so good, and it was about the concept that time will pass. So he was kind of saying like, whether you do or you don't, time will pass. Like that's the one thing you can be sure of. Whether you travel tomorrow or you stay home, time will pass. And I know that for a lot of us, we forget about that factor. Like we're sort of aware that time is passing, but we get so caught up in the everyday that we sort of ignore it. And like you say to someone like, in 5 years' time, you could have X, Y, or Z. And we sort of think like, oh, that's like ages away. But if I think about the fact that my eldest daughter is 9 and my youngest is 2.5, like it's like, wow, like that time has gone so fast. So when we think about time as in the future, it seems like it's a long way away. But when we think of the past and how quickly that time has gone, it's like, wow, like it's happened in a second. And so where am I going with that? I think what I'm trying to say is what that video brought up for me is that we ignore the fact that time is passing until it's already passed. And then we go, oh my God, like I could have done X, Y, and Z. I could have done this, I could have done that. I could have filled that time with more than just the everyday rinse and repeat that I filled it with. There's also a thing I saved on Pinterest that said, "These are the good old days." And it's kind of sort of in that same vein of like, time is going to pass. This moment we have right now is one day going to be something we consider the good old days. So here is how I think you can apply that to that sense of apathy and that sort of resistance to go through exposure therapy. I really want you to think about the fact that your life is going to pass you by. Time is going to pass regardless of what you do, right? So if you think about the fact that you might get to the end of your life, hopefully a long time from now, hopefully after you've lived 110 good years, but you might get to the end of your life. Well, you will get to the end of your life, and you will look back and you will go, I either did the things I wanted to do or I didn't do the things I wanted to do. You might be able to fool yourself now into thinking that you're comfortable with the way things are, and that or even if you're not totally comfortable with the way things are, it's like, I just don't have that drive to really do exposure and to change my circumstances. Propel yourself into the future if you can, and think about the fact that time's going to pass. Will you be comfortable with what you've done? So if you are just kind of existing in that space of the comfort zone, the rinse and repeat, I'm able to function, but I'm not able to go on holidays, or I'm not able to go on road trips, or I'm not able to do the big things that I'd like to do with my friends. Are you going to be happy to get to the end of your days and not have done those things? Are you going to be happy for your kids, if you have them, to grow up and, get to adulthood and not have had the childhood that you want them to have had? My guess is the answer is no, because I think there's always things that we wish we could do. There's always more that we want to be able to do, right? And I think that's normal to a degree. But if you are just letting yourself exist in that space of apathy, and you're not wanting to push yourself because you feel like you just don't really have the motivation for it, that motivation isn't going to suddenly arrive. You have to start pushing yourself out of your comfort zone. I don't often say you're going to have to start pushing yourself, but I think when it comes to apathy and that sort of feeling of blah, I think you do have to push. You have to propel yourself forward in order for that motivation to come, because time is going to pass. And the reason I said before that, you really need to spend a month figuring out what those things are is because of the way we wrap those dreams and goals up and put them on the shelf, as I was saying. I spent a lot of time convincing myself that I didn't want to travel. I write about this in my book, that I thought I was someone who didn't want to travel after I dealt with panic and anxiety and agoraphobia, and when I'd kind of recovered from agoraphobia, so I was able to hold down a job, I was able to take my kid to school, I was able to see friends in comfortable places in places that I had pre-approved as comfortable for me. I was able to do all of those things, but I thought I don't want to travel though. I don't want a big exciting life. I just want to be able to do the normal things. I'm just happy with that. I'm happy with the simple life. But I actually realized after a while of going to therapy and doing a lot of journaling and a lot of inquiry that I really had this burning desire to travel, but I just had been keeping it really repressed because I knew that in order to feel that urge to travel, I was also going to have to explore the resistance to travel. I was going to have to explore the fear of travel and the anxiety that it was going to bring up. I was going to have to face my fears, and I didn't want to do that. I'd already spent so long doing that. I didn't want to have to keep doing it. So I kind of had tricked myself into this just state of easy functioning. Although I feel like the word easy isn't entirely accurate, because it was hard. It was hard to function every day. I was doing the best I could, but I was not allowing myself to dream further, because, like I said, I knew that's where the pain point was really going to be. But when I did eventually open up to that, when I did acknowledge that I actually really did have that desire to travel, when I found that out, not only did it surprise me, but I also found this I found this drive to start challenging myself again. And so I think we keep these dreams and desires locked away, and then we exist in this state of apathy, this state of like just losing motivation to do exposures. But it's only because we're not looking at the things that we actually do want to do. So I think it's so important to spend that time reflecting and figuring out what it is that you want out of your life. And, the answers that you come up initially might not be the real answers. So keep asking that question. What do I want to do? What do I want for my kids? What do I want for my future? What jobs do I want to do? What places do I want to go? What kind of person do I want to be? What music do I want to listen to? Keep asking in different ways and see what comes up. What answer comes up repeatedly is going to be probably the kicker. And then when you find that out, I want you to allow yourself the permission to explore that. And I want you to remember that time is going to pass. And are you going to be happy to not go after those things? If you are, then great. Keep doing what you're doing. But if you think that after time has passed, you're going to regret having not done those things, that's where you start going, okay, I need to push myself to start exposures again. I need to push myself to start chasing after these things that I want. And it's after you start that the motivation comes. So motivation is one of those things that you can't rely on to always be there. Sometimes it gets invigorated once you do something. And so for a lot of us in the comfort zone phase, there is no motivation because we're just doing the same shit every day. So there's no chance for that motivation to kick in. We might get inspired. We might feel like, oh, maybe I could do this, maybe I could do that. But then if we keep doing the same rinse and repeat every day, then there's no sort of air to that fire. You know what I mean? So the act of doing something, the act of changing your environment, the act of starting to push yourself, that's what gives that air to that fire. That's what makes the fire burn brighter. And that's when the motivation starts to kick in. So to recap, I want you to inquire relentlessly about what it is that you want from your life, what it is that you think you are here to do. What do you want to do? What do you want to feel? Where are the places you want to go? What do you want to do? Keep inquiring about that. And then once you've figured it out, ask yourself the question, if 50 years passes, not if it passes, it is going to pass. And when I get to that end of 50 years, am I going to be happy to have not done those things? If the answer is no, then begin to start challenging yourself. Begin to start pushing at the edges of your comfort zone. Even if you don't feel motivated to do so necessarily, that motivation is going to come after you take the action. I hope this episode has lit a little bit of a fire within you, and I hope you start to give it some air by adding some action. I will try and find that video because it really was really beautiful, the time will pass video, and I'll link it in the show notes. I hope you're all doing really well. I will see you next time. Take care. Bye. Thank you for listening to the Us Anxious Folk podcast, the podcast for the chronically overwhelmed, perpetually panicked, anxious folk in all of us. If you would like to find more about me, you can find me on YouTube at Lauren Rose or on Instagram at Lauren R_Rose.